where silence bloomed, a story of quiet endings, unspoken truths, and the slow, steady rebuilding of a life no longer shared but fully chosen. The house was always quiet at that hour before light filtered through the curtains, before the movement of life stirred again. In those early moments, the silence wasn't haunting, just familiar. It accompanied her like an old companion, steady and known. She moved through the hallway, collecting the remnants of the night before: a lone sock beneath the table, a toy with a missing piece, and a coffee mug half forgotten near the sink. This routine required no thought. Her body moved before her mind caught up. The rhythm was long established, unquestioned. Years had folded into a pattern of unremarkable repetition. In that silence, something else had also settled a distance, one that crept in slowly without alarm. Between her and her husband, once anchored by warmth and subtle joys, there now lay a quiet stretch. Not anger, not resentment, just space. A space that widened imperceptibly over time until it became the room itself. They still functioned as a unit. Meals were shared and logistics were discussed, school drop-offs, upcoming bills, and grocery needs. But those conversations were frameworks, not connections. There were no harsh words, but also no laughter like before. Sometimes she'd turn, intending to say something, and pause, unsure what, if anything, needed to be spoken. That silence, subtle at first, became a defining trait of their togetherness. A quiet unraveling, not loud enough to notice until the warmth had already left. Her sister had always been a presence in her life. She lived nearby, dropped by frequently, always with something in hand: homemade soup, a new face cream, or a quick story about a colleague. Her visits were a constant, comforting in their regularity. She was kind, polished, and attentive. Her daughter adored her. Her husband smiled more when she was around. And it all made sense. They were family. They had always been close, all three of them. In the beginning, there was no need for suspicion. Her sister remembered little details of his favorite brand of tea and the way he took his coffee. And those things were helpful. Life was demanding, and she was often too tired to remember every preference or fill every emotional gap. Having someone else step in occasionally wasn't just useful, it was a relief. She let herself believe in the safety of that closeness. But slowly shifts began to emerge. Moments stretched out longer than they should. Eye contact lingered. He grew quieter around her, not in a distracted way, but as if he were carrying a secret not yet fully formed. Her sister began to smile in ways that felt unfamiliar almost. These were not facts, just feelings, glances, stillness where movement once lived. She told herself it was nothing. She'd always been the overthinker. It was easier to stay busy, to let the doubt pass like clouds on a windy day. But she started to watch them, unintentionally at first, then more deliberately, not looking for proof, just trying to understand what she was feeling. She noticed things she hadn't before: his attentiveness to details that once escaped him, her sister's growing quietness during visits. Still, no confession came, just that creeping feeling of having fallen out of step with her own life. He started working later, claiming deadlines and fatigue. He came home with a weariness that didn't seem rooted in work. She asked once casually about his schedule. He responded normally. She nodded. And that became their agreement, unspoken but real: to nod instead of question, to coexist instead of confront. So she let the questions dissolve. She poured herself into daily tasks. She focused on her daughter, maintained her job, and kept the house running. They became two figures in a shared space, moving around each other with practiced coordination, but no intimacy. Their lives were intertwined by history, but no longer by presence. Then, one afternoon while tidying the study, a message appeared on his computer screen. Brief. Familiar. Her sister's name hovered at the top. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. The contents weren't important. The message itself was the clarity she hadn't asked for. There were no tears, no storm, only stillness. She stood in that room for several minutes, her body frozen, her thoughts slow. It wasn't a shock exactly, it was something quieter, like understanding finally arriving long after it was needed. In that moment, she realized the story she thought she was living in wasn't the same one he or her sister was writing. Her marriage, her home, her family, all these structures she had leaned on had changed shape when she wasn't looking. They had become something else entirely. But she didn't confront them. She didn't rage or demand. She watched, observed how the pieces shifted in the days that followed. He grew more distant still. Her sister visited less frequently. Every silence between them grew heavier with meaning. Knowing something didn't make it easier to carry. Understanding, in its quiet way, was heavier than ignorance. Eventually, he left. A break, they called it. Nothing dramatic. A trial separation that didn't require a public explanation. When their daughter asked, she said he was busy. It wasn't a lie, just not the whole truth. Her sister never reached out. Not once. The absence of contact was its own kind of statement. The house grew quieter, not just from his absence, but from the energy he had taken with him. It didn't feel like relief, only stillness. She adjusted. Life became task-driven. Wake, prepare, drive, work, return, repeat. The structure was what held her together, piece by piece. People asked how things were. She smiled gently and gave answers that revealed nothing. No one asked twice. Some nights, she'd sit at the kitchen table and stare outside, not thinking about anything in particular, just letting time move. The world kept turning. The responsibilities didn't pause for heartbreak. Groceries still had to be bought. Bills still needed paying. Her daughter still needed warmth and guidance. Life, in its relentless way, didn't stop for grief. That was its own kind of mercy, and also its own kind of cruelty. Then came the call she didn't expect. Her sister is gone. A car accident on a rainy evening, a sudden end without warning. She received the news with strange clarity. Signed papers, identified belongings, listened to careful words from strangers. It all happened around her as if she were underwater, observing the scene but untouched by it. The grief didn't land all at once. It came in echoes. She found a notebook in her sister's bag, simple pages with mundane details. Grocery lists, work notes, bits of forgotten thoughts. On one page, her name had been written. Just her name, followed by a few unfinished lines. They didn't explain anything, but they sat heavy in her chest. At the funeral, she stood silent, her daughter's hand in hers. People spoke with reverence, sharing memories, painting pictures. She listened, but none of it felt complete. She wondered if we ever truly know the people closest to us, or if we simply know versions shaped by time and need. Time moved on. Seasons shifted. And the space her sister once filled remained unspoken, unresolved. As time unfolded in its quiet and consistent way, her daughter began to grow taller, more independent, and curious in ways that caught her off guard. She started making her own choices, selecting clothes with surprising confidence, and asking questions that felt heavier than before. She didn't speak often about her aunt or her father, but the silences she kept around them were not born of ignorance. They were shaped by a child's instinct, a deep sense of what could be said aloud and what should remain untouched. The house continued its quiet rhythm. Mornings were filled with simple routines. Evenings passed without urgency. The rooms echoed differently now, not with emptiness, but with a settled kind of solitude. It didn't feel like loss anymore, just life taking a new shape. One day, as the early warmth of spring pressed against the windows, she turned her attention to the garden in the backyard. It had long been neglected, the soil hidden beneath weeds and fallen branches. She didn't know why she decided to tend to it. It wasn't for beauty or nostalgia. It was just a feeling, a desire to clear space, to make room for something else. The work was slow and methodical. She knelt in the earth, pulling at roots hardened by time and trimming back branches that blocked the light. The ground was dry, cracked in places, but when she dug deeper, the soil revealed its softness. Her daughter joined her in the effort, scattering seeds across the patches they had cleared. Not with planning or precision, but with the hope that something might grow if given the chance. Wildflowers, they decided. Not because they were perfect, but because they required little and offered much. They didn't expect uniformity. They only wanted color, life, a small rebellion against the stillness that had settled in. The garden became a quiet project. Each morning, they'd water it. Sometimes the plants responded, sometimes they didn't. But that uncertainty felt familiar now. It didn't discourage her. It made the process more honest. He came back once in a while, not to return to what they had, but to maintain a thread of connection through their daughter. The visits were short, filled with polite exchanges and brief updates. They didn't talk about the past or what had changed between them. There was no longer any weight between them, no expectations, only the shared understanding of what had been and what would never be again. Their conversations were measured. Their tone is neutral. They weren't unkind, just distant in a way that no longer hurt. They had passed the point where blame had meaning. The story they had built together had ended without drama, only with the quiet acknowledgement that not all things meant to last do. She didn't hate him anymore, or her sister. The emotions that once felt sharp had dulled over time. She hadn't forgiven them, but the urgency to do so had faded. What she had instead was acceptance of a slow, steady reckoning that gave her space to live without dragging the weight of old wounds behind her. Acceptance didn't offer closure. It didn't remove the ache of what had been lost, but it allowed her to move, to breathe, to find beauty in things again, even if they weren't the same. Sometimes, she found things that belonged to her sister. A scarf tucked in the back of a drawer, a novel left on a shelf, or a piece of paper with a half-written recipe. These moments no longer startled her. They simply made her pause. The presence of memory, not as pain, but as a quiet reminder of someone who once shared the same spaces. The garden began to change. Flowers bloomed unevenly. Some clusters thrived, others remained dormant. It wasn't a perfect scene, but it felt honest. There was life in the disorder, a quiet resistance to stillness. The colors returned in their own time. The house too transformed, not in structure, but in mood. It was still quiet, but not in the way it had been during those first months. The silence no longer echoed with absence. It had settled into something softer, something hers. She began to wake early again, not out of obligation, but by choice. Mornings became a ritual of stillness. Coffee brewed while the sky turned pale. She'd sit by the window, wrapped in a worn sweater, and listen to the slow rising of the day. Her daughter's room pulsed with soft music and the scatter of art supplies. Creativity lived there now, unforced and unafraid. Her days were full in quiet ways. She went to work. She spoke to people. Sometimes she laughed. Sometimes she didn't. But everything moved forward without the need for explanation. She read more, cooked things she liked, found small joy in forgotten songs and the way sunlight touched the floor. She didn't think of the past every day, but when she did, it came to her gently. Not like a storm, but like a breeze slipping through an open window unexpectedly, then gone again. The memories didn't haunt her. They rested beside her, softened by time. There was no great moment of healing, no revelation, just slow rebuilding, not of the life she once had, but of something new, something quieter, more her own. The garden bloomed through summer and into fall. Some flowers wilted early, others lasted longer than expected. Each day brought change. Nothing stayed as it was. And that, she realized, was the point. The house, once filled with a silence shaped by absence, now held a different kind of quiet. One of peace, of rest, of choice. She had lost much, more than words could express. But she had also gained a steadiness, a life no longer built on expectations or roles she had outgrown. And that life, though not remarkable in the ways others might define it, was hers. Simple, honest, resilient. Each morning she rose with the light, knowing the past would never fully leave her, but trusting that the future, however imperfect, was still worth growing into.